Thank you very much, Erwin, for the friendly introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would also like to thank Civic Exchange, Walk21, and especially the German Konrad Adenauer Foundation, who invited me for the possibility of talking to you today about air quality action in European cities. As Erwin already said, I work for the Hamburg Chamber of Commerce, which means that I work for the business community in Hamburg. I would like to start with some basic data on Hamburg, then switch on to EU, European Union's regulation on air quality, and then focus and explain some fields of actions of air quality action in Hamburg, what Hamburg is doing to meet EU limits. So Hamburg is just located in the center of Europe, between east and west. It's the second largest city in Germany with about 1.8, 1.7 million inhabitants. The metropolitan area of Hamburg, there are about 5 million people living. And what is interesting in this context, about 37% of the people working in Hamburg don't live in Hamburg. That means they are commuting to Hamburg and back home every day. This just is meant to give you an impression of the economic structure in Hamburg. What is important on this chart is that the economic structure in Hamburg is much broader than the German average. There's the very large services share, not only industry. And of course, as Hamburg is located just between the Baltic and the North Sea, it's also a hub for logistics and trade in Northern Europe. Also, the economic structure is very, very broad and is a large mixture of everything. Hamburg is the largest industry location in Germany, and is also one of the largest ports in Europe, with China being the most important trade partner. The Hamburg Chamber of Commerce is the interest representation of the business community in Germany. What is interesting is that we have mandatory chamber membership in Germany. So literally every company in Hamburg has to be a member of the Chamber of Commerce, which gives us about 150,000 member companies, and these member companies are also financing our work, so we don't get any subsidies from the state or from authorities. The businesses are financing our work. Switching on to the European Union and its regulation on air quality. A lot of this has already been said by Simon and by Dane also. It's pretty much the same in Europe. The European Union sticks to WHO recommendations, and you have an air quality directive setting limits for various air pollutants like arsen, cadmium, lead, benzol, but these are not very problematic in Europe anymore. What is problematic is also the nitrogen dioxide, NO2 or NOx, and particulate matters. If any country or metropolitan region or city in Europe doesn't meet the limits set by the European Union, and there are also annual limits, and there are 1 hour limits, there are daily limits. So if you don't meet these limits, you have to set up air quality plans, but the European Union does not give any material orientation what should be content of this air quality plan. So it's up to the member states and also the member cities, the regions in Europe, to set up these plans and to fill them with action. In Hamburg, we used to have a problem with particulate matters, 10 here, but also 2.5. This is not a problem anymore in Hamburg, but we have a regional or local problem with the NOx's. Like almost all other metropolitan regions in Europe do. And this is just to give you an impression. This is pretty much about what Dane said. We have various control stations in Europe. They are controlling background load and the regional load. And there are 3 or 4 control stations. These are the traffic control stations where the NOx limits are not being met continually. Guess this must also be interesting for you, Dane, because it refers to the causal research, what you have been doing research on. This is, these are the traffic control stations in Hamburg, and if you are trying to locate the sources of pollutants, it's pretty much clear that most of load is being emitted locally by cars on the streets, and these are mostly diesel cars. So maybe I go back for a minute. You have other sources, of course. Shipping, for example, Simon, you told me you went to Hamburg just this spring for conference on shipping. You saw all the ships in Hamburg. They are emitting a lot of emittance, of course, but if you look at these problematic control stations in Hamburg, it's very obvious that not the shipping is the problem, but car traffic on the roads is the most problematic source. A lot of text on this slide. There's a phenomenon in Germany called Umweltzone, or environmental zones, which means you ban traffic from the city centers. There's a system based on colored stickers, green, yellow, red. And after a while, after being introduced, you can only go into these environmental zones with a green sticker. This is a 54 German cities have introduced these environmental zones, and it was a very useful instrument for fighting the particulate matters, but it's not useful in fighting NOx emissions because of the diesel cars, briefly said. You get with a diesel car Euro 4 and 5, you also get a green sticker, so this means you are allowed to go into these environmental zones, but Euro 4 and 5 diesel cars have very, very high NOx emissions still. So this system, the traditional system of German environmental zones, was not useful in fighting NOx's. And at the moment, we have a discussion going on about introducing additionally blue stickers to this 3-color system, and the blue sticker would only be for very, very clean, only the Euro 6 category cars, also Euro 6 diesel cars, which briefly summarized means that introducing a blue sticker and then using this for exceeding environmental zones would be efficient in fighting NOx's, but on the other hand, it would mean that you basically ban most of the cars, more than 90% of the cars, from driving in city centers. So, yeah. It would be effective. It would be effective, but it would not be reasonable. And this is also the cause for the blue sticker not being in force in Germany at the moment. And I would, in the last part of my presentation, switch on to Hamburg, because Hamburg has no Umweltzone, no environmental zone at the moment. But as the NOx limits are not being met, Hamburg has to set up this air quality plan, and this is what it looks like. It was published in 2004. which means already 12 years ago. It was adjusted in 2012, consists of about 80 measures in 3 fields of action: mobility, shipping, industry. But there are some court decisions right now saying that Hamburg has to further adjust this air quality plan. And also treaty violations proceedings are going on by the EU since June last year, as Hamburg is not meeting the limits set by the European Union for NOx. Just to give you an impression of various fields of action, motor car traffic is the first one. The German government is trying to encourage e-mobility, and Hamburg is one of the German model regions. But if you look at the total number of cars in Hamburg, this is not very much by now. We have about 2,500 cars, 250 charging points. And what we as a chamber are doing, for example, is we set up a market stimulating initiative to make e-mobility more livable without subsidies, without money from the state. There are some hydrogen projects going on in Hamburg, and what might be interesting on this chart is the reversal of evidence principle for ministries and authorities in Hamburg. That means if you are purchasing new cars, you have to buy e-mobiles or hydrogen cars, at least if you don't have a good reason for not doing this. Switching on to public transport, first of all, you can say that the Hamburg traffic network is one of the most efficient and also cost-efficient ones in Europe. The S-Bahn, this is the metro system in Hamburg, runs completely with green electricity being produced by hydropower. There are about 60 E and E-hybrid and hydrogen buses driving on Hamburg cars. And what I would also like to mention is the Switch project, which means interconnecting public transport with rental cars and bikes at the main public transport stations. There you have also stations for rental cars, e-mobiles and bikes, and with your public transport card you are able to use these rental cars and bikes. So it's a smart interconnection of public transport and other means of transport. Shipping. The IMO sets very ambitious standards for shipping, especially when it comes to sulfur. And Simon, you probably heard about this in Hamburg. They're the first onshore power supply station for cruise ships, being opened last year in Hamburg. The problem is there are not so many ships being able to use this onshore power supply station. And you have 2 pilot projects going on for the use of LNG hybrid vessels for cruise ships, which means these vessels have a motor being driven by LNG, and they produce electricity, and the electricity is being used to provide power for the cruise ships while they are in the port of Hamburg. The port fee system in Hamburg is based on environmental criteria. Some examples: the ESI is the Environmental Sustainability Index. I think that's the abbreviation. And if you are using LNG, or if you are able to use the onshore power station, you also have to pay less for lying in the port of Hamburg as a ship owner. Bike and walk. Biking and walking is not such a big subject in Germany and also not in Hamburg, because maybe because it works quite well by now. There's a bike traffic strategy in Hamburg. We have a bike coordinator, a lot of bike ways in the city, and a very ambitious goal for biking, model split of 25% in the 2020s. There's no more concrete data, only the 2020s. I think we are at about 12% right now. Yeah, bike and ride, which means you use public transport and then switch to bike. The sign, the photograph on the right pages is the symbol for these bike and ride stations. When it comes to walking and walkability, I would like to mention the crosswalks in Hamburg, in Germany. This might be interesting for you. You have a general primacy for walkers at crosswalks. That means if you want to cross the street, the pedestrian cars have to stop. Industry. I've shown you before that most of the NOx emissions are being caused by the street car traffic, but also industry is an important source. And the major industry firms in Hamburg have reduced their emissions CO2, most of all within the last 20 years by many percent, and we have a couple of partnerships, the business community and Hamburg's authorities, for encouraging businesses in reducing CO2 and other emissions. And this is my last slide, as time is running out. There's another partnership initiated by the Hamburg Chamber of Commerce. We call it Partnership for Clean Air. And also the basic principle is to stimulate voluntary action of businesses for clean mobility by consulting, by financial support, by supporting e-mobility, mobility management in companies, networking, information events, and so on. And we started this initiative, this partnership, 4 years ago now, and there are 230 member companies at the moment, which is okay, but of course could be more, and this is what we are working on. I'm at the end of my presentation, and I think we still have some time, Alvin, to discuss the 3 presentations. Thank you very much.